Welcome to Crying Out Cloud, the podcast that will make you laugh, cry, and reconsider all of your cloud security fears. I'm Eden. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Amitai.
Howdy.
We're back. It's been a while. We didn't do a news episode, but we're gonna fill you in on everything you need to know. What are we gonna tell them about, Amitai?
So today, first off, we have a guest, Rami McCarthy from the Wiz Research team, who's going to come and talk about his research into VSCode extension supply chain attacks and the work he did there, which is really cool. Next, we'll be talking about a Redis vulnerability, also discovered by Wiz Research at Pom2Own, that we called Redis Shell. Then we're going to talk about a security incident that happened to F5 and try to figure out what that's about. We're going to talk a bit about how attackers are sort of incorporating AI into their malware and using AI CLIs that they find on target machines and why they might be doing that and what it might mean. And then we'll do a new section that we're calling
Quick hits.
like cricket.
Take note that Amitai has wonderful activities for his children. Play-Doh, chalkboard.
How do you know these are for my children? Maybe I like to play with Play-Doh in my spare time.
Yeah, we should write out the vulns on the chalkboard. Like it's
Oh, I can do that. I can do that next time. I'll do that next time.
okay. For our next topic, we have the VSCode extension supply chain attack. Rami is on the pod today to talk about it. Rami is the head of risk research at Wiz. Welcome back to the pod.
Thrilled to be a frequent flyer.
Let's just start with what did you find? Tell us.
Yeah, so this is something we shared out from the Wiz Research blog recently. It was actually a relatively long research process for what I would say is an issue with a really simple root cause. Fundamentally, what we found was that VS Code extension marketplaces, so VS Code being the most popular developer IDE, has extensions that add functionality. These are distributed through both the official VS Code marketplace run by Microsoft and the open VSX marketplace that is tied to AI-enabled IDEs like, for example, Cursor. Those extensions were frequently leaking secrets from their publishers. So publishers were shipping out these bundles of code, and with any bundle of code that gets shipped out to the internet, it tends to leak secrets. And that was the initial insight. We actually started by looking for malware, and then we stumbled on this problem of secrets and decided to take a deeper look there. And secrets on their own are problematic, but we have a lot of cases of secrets leaking these days. I mean, Wiz has published research on how AI has contributed to increased secrets leakage. We've seen secrets in NPM and PyPy, on GitHub, of course. The bigger issue came when we made another connection, which was a lot of the secrets that were leaked were actually publishing tokens for these marketplaces. So what you'd have is you'd have a very popular extension that was distributed that carried with it ability to update that extension across the entire user base. So extensions in VS Code are auto-updating. If you ship a new version, it gets pushed out to everyone's laptop. And in the end, we figured out that we could push malware directly to somewhere around 185,000 developer laptops who were using vulnerable extensions across both marketplaces.
So imagine it wasn't you who found it, who's nice and lovely and awesome. But if an attacker found these tokens, like what's the scope of what they could have done with this?
Yeah. So there are two references I'd make here when we talk about the scope of impact. So the first is that we recently had a wormable attack on NPM happen. This was, a recent incident where NPM packages were compromised, and once compromised, poisoned additional NPM packages. That incident, made the news, was far-reaching, had a pretty severe impact across the landscape, and was eventually centrally stopped by NPM and by GitHub. So we could worm this malware, right? If we're able to distribute to 185,000 desktops, we could immediately perpetuate that malware onto other supply chains, whether that's NPM packages, whether that's extensions that are published by victims of the initial attack. So that's just like one recent incident that leveraged a similar capability on a much smaller scale. The NPM attack, the worm was seeded with 3 or 4 packages, I think. And so here we have well over 100 different extensions, a really diverse user base that gives, more legs to it. The other issue is that shortly after I published this research, actually, someone attempted something very similar maliciously in the OpenVSX marketplace. This reported by a couple firms, but there was a attempted worm through OpenVSX. It doesn't seem to be particularly well crafted or particularly successful. And in that case, they used one leaked token to publish at least one, maybe three or four, to publish a malicious OpenVSX extension. And so that may have impacted, a handful of real world users. The possible scope of install base was relatively low. It was in the few thousands. And so that didn't give enough leverage, enough attack surface for a worm to get off the ground. And so when we're looking at some of these worms, there is a tipping point where if you can get broad enough distribution initially, it becomes really hard for the industry to react and outpace it. It tends to spread exponentially. And so the larger the starting population, the larger the eventual impact.
Is this affecting enterprise, or is it affecting just like anyone can install these extensions, right?
So it impacts everyone, enterprise or not. There are a few ways it's specifically impactful to enterprises, and I think a lot of enterprises are who cares about these issues. Individual developers obviously have a less rigor around their security than an enterprise would. So a few things we've seen recently. In the Shai-Hulud and Singularity attacks, we've seen developer accounts leaking enterprise secrets. And that similar could have happened here. If you have a developer who has enterprise credentials mingled with a personal IDE instance, it would have been very easy for those lines to blur. The second thing is that there are actually many impacted extensions here that are internal to companies, but distributed publicly. So, for example, AcmeCo has a internal developer efficiency extension. And the easiest way to get it out to people is to just put it on the marketplace, right? Download it. Will OAuth you as soon as you download the extension and log in. So, we're not risking anyone else using this extension, but it's internal. And some of those extensions had leaked secrets as well. So those were companies where you could immediately attack their developers in a really targeted way, including one we make reference to, anonymized, of course, is a $30 billion Chinese megacore, had a internal developer extension with hundreds of users using it. So that's like a company that's sort of really at risk were this to have been discovered and weaponized by an attacker.
It's crazy, first of all. What has been the response? Like, obviously, you have a mega company and they have a different response than maybe like just the average person on the internet. But what has been the response to the finding from the community? And then I'd also love to hear from Microsoft and working with them.
Yeah, so we were very careful when disclosing and eventually when publishing this finding to be as responsible as possible, to give the most time for the industry to respond, for vulnerable folks to respond. I will say we've seen a similar pattern with secrets leakage where, in any form of mass disclosure, it can be hard to get disclosure acknowledged and remediated by the victims themselves, the publishers, right? Some of these publishers put up a popular extension 5 years ago and don't have access to the email anymore. However, we also spent 6 months working with Microsoft centrally to address this. And that took a few forms. So one is Microsoft is much better equipped than me personally to do a notification campaign to VSCode marketplace publishers. And so they did a mass notification campaign, multiple rounds. They also removed extensions where there was no response. So if you were exposing a secret and they couldn't get in touch with you, they would proactively protect you by taking down that extension in some cases. And finally, they added server-side prevention here for leaking future secrets. So Microsoft owns GitHub, right? They have a long history of secrets detection and awareness, like the GitHub secret scanning program. They've now applied that to the VS Code marketplace. So when you go to publish an extension, you will get stopped and warned if there's a secret. And in fact, they block it. There's no opting in to leaking secrets in your VS Code extensions anymore.
So what should people using VS Code extensions and orgs do to protect themselves?
I think if you're an enterprise, you have two ways of doing security here. One is you can limit what extensions are run, centrally manage it. Or two, you can limit the impact of a single developer workstation being hacked. Those are both hard problems. I think some companies have done a really strong push on the latter, right? They're moving to Chromebooks for many roles. They're removing credentials from machines. They're using virtual development environments, right? There's hardening you can do that makes this less of an issue when it happens. But maybe a more targeted approach would be extension allow listing and management centrally. And this applies to all extensions. The importance of the supply chain attack here is that it doesn't matter how complicated, risky, interesting the extension is. We found a lot of cases where we found leaked tokens to themes. And themes are just like configuration bundles for colors in your VS Code instance. They don't even have code. So as a security team, you're inclined to allow that sort of thing, right? Like it's not as scary as something with code. But there's nothing stopping someone taking a theme and hijacking the developer account and pushing out malware. There's nothing actually limiting themes on the code execution front. So another example of really where you have to be relatively restrictive, and also consider whether auto updates are the best fit for your organization or not.
And what in terms of what like just individuals can do, are there any like open source tools that they can use to sort of scan their extensions, or just in terms of best practices, like what should they be avoiding?
If the features aren't in the platform, individuals are going to really struggle always. That's my belief, right? Like if a platform has security hardening, you can always talk about like the Apple App Store, right? Apple is responsible for review there, ensuring that only safe things go through. I think step one is gauge your trust in the marketplace. Like if you're using OpenVSX, there's a set of security controls. If you're using the official VS Code marketplace, there's a higher bar right now for security. And so considering where you source your extensions is part of your risk math. I think also we talk about how to measure risk in third-party packages and extensions in a generic way. Popularity, history, recency, right? There are all these metrics you can use as sort of a thumb in the wind. And so what I would say is the active malware we've seen, barring these supply chain takeovers, which are impossible for a user to defend themselves against, frankly, right? Like don't use any extension because if it gets taken over, like you can't do anything, right? Instead, what I would say is focus on very popular extensions. Look at the publishing date. Look at how many downloads it has. Look at how many reviews. People will pump fake downloads, so make sure it's not just a brand new version. People do typo squatting. Go directly to the marketplace. Don't follow Google search results. We know people do SEO poisoning as part of attacks. They'll put fake ads in. Don't go and follow some sort of AI hallucinated, slop squatted extension name. And really just consider that these are part of your attack surface. I think we've gotten really comfortable. Same thing in NPM with JavaScript packages, just like willy-nilly expanding our attack surface by adding on other people's code, other people's exposure. And every VS Code extension you bring means you're not just trusting the code as it currently is, but if you're having auto updates, you're trusting the publisher and their personal security, and just keeping that in mind.
When you found this and you had your big moment of glory, what did you do to celebrate, and what did you have for dinner that night?
I did not. Here's the fun part about research like this is you don't get to celebrate until you publish, because you know you're in for a long road of responsible disclosure. And so, in fact, I flew to the US the night after finally publishing this blog and really turned off my laptop and closed myself down for comments, attended a beautiful wedding. So we'll call that the celebration. But
And closing your laptop is a celebration.
Anytime my laptop is closed, it's a good day.
Amazing. Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. Come back soon. We appreciate all of your work and all of your insight.
Thank you. Give me 9 months to find something else interesting. I'll be right back.
All right. Redis vulnerability. A significant new vulnerability has been discovered. So what do we know about this so far, Amitai?
Well, I mean, we know a lot because, I mean, it was discovered by Wiz. I will say that some of the details aren't public yet. Reason being that we're trying to give people some time to patch before we reveal to the world how this vulnerability actually allows RCE. Benny, a researcher from Wiz Research who discovered it, recently gave a talk at Hexacon about this. So if you were at Hexacon, you probably know the answer. And if not, then you'll have to wait for our blog post or ask someone who was at Hexacon.
Oh, we have to give them a tease on the podcast.
A little tease? Well, I can say that it definitely allows RCE, which is not obvious because it was very difficult to do so from what I hear.
Do we know how many organizations were potentially affected by this?
So this affected all past versions because it was part of the Lua engine, which has always been part of Redis, as far as I know. And this probably existed for around 13 years. And Redis is used, according to our data, in around 75% of cloud environments. And this affected all of them. And it's really, really widespread. A lot of people install Redis as part of their products. A lot of people have Redis in their environment and they don't even know about it just because it comes packaged alongside other software that uses Redis. So Redis is very prevalent, which makes this vulnerability very important to patch.
Okay, so if I am listening and I want to know what to do, what do I do?
So first off, you need to find where this vulnerability is likely to be exploited, which means that you need to search for cases where it's publicly exposed, where Redis is actually exposed to the internet, and running in a way that allows you to anyone to authenticate, which means either have no authentication or have like a weak or default password. Now, interestingly, Redis does actually have, in its default configuration, it doesn't allow anyone to authenticate anonymously. It doesn't even allow you to expose it to the internet by default. However, there are many flavors of Redis and many different ways to install Redis. And in some of them which are really common, um, authentication is actually set to allow anonymous access by default. Um, So depending on how you install Redis, you are either affected by this or not. So our suggestion is, again, focus on publicly exposed instances that are misconfigured to allow anonymous authentication.
Okay, next topic is the F5 security incident. So there's a network device manufacturing company, F5. They had a breach by a Chinese threat actor. F5 makes like products like big IP. They serve things like as a firewall or a router. Um, what's crazy about this, and we'll get into a little more details in a minute, but the TLDR is the threat actor was in their network for 2 whole years. And F5 isn't exactly clear on what they did in the environment, but they did access their source code.
Yeah, I guess this could be classified as infosec drama in some ways, although the drama is sort of between F5 and China, I guess. It's also sort of between F5 and like the legal system and their customers and the rest of the community, because F5 took a while to disclose this. Many times it takes a while to disclose these things just because it takes a while to determine if there's actually been any material impact. And material impact, at least in the States, kind of determines whether you actually need to disclose this publicly. So there were two delays here. One is it took them a while to even realize that they had been breached. And once they realized this, it took them a while to reach the point where they felt comfortable sharing this with the world, telling people what happened. Um, One thing that they did, which was, I think it made a lot of sense before they went public, was they enlisted the help of a few companies to basically check their source code and figure out if it was likely that the actor inserted anything malicious into their source code during the time that they were there. The simplest explanation is they just wanted the source code to have it. Maybe they were trying to steal other things like personal information about their customers. Maybe they were trying to steal like their documentation. We know that they managed to gain access to information about vulnerabilities that hadn't been published yet, which in theory could have been like really cool for the threat actor, but in actuality, these vulnerabilities, when you look at them, they don't really seem to be very interesting in and of themselves. But if they were there for a while, then any vulnerability published over the past few years, in theory, they might have had advanced notice about. However, just stealing source code and just stealing documentation doesn't seem like it would be worth the effort. Um, and it kind of makes sense that they'd want to do a bit something more. So I think um, everyone's sort of wondering what they were doing there.
But what's interesting is or interesting depends who you are. What I find fascinating, we find fascinating is the Chinese like operations aspect of this. Like we've seen a trend of Chinese operations as of late. Where does this tie into it? What does it tell us about their larger maybe motives or what we should be looking for other things they might get themselves into?
Saying that Chinese threat actors or China in general has an interest in edge devices like F5 Big IP, um, that makes a lot of sense. Like it makes sense that they'd want information or the means of conducting a supply chain attack or stealing vulnerabilities about relevant to edge devices like Big IP. The idea is that this lets them get initial access into networks without requiring any interaction with victims. Like, you don't need to do social engineering. So the attacker can kind of just control the situation. It's the equivalent of like a zero-click vulnerability on an iPhone. Like, you decide when you get into the organization, and nobody can stop you because you have a zero-day vulnerability. And these things are sort of meant to be exposed. You can't not expose them. And also, edge devices are very comfortable for threat actors because there's not a lot of visibility on them. You usually can't install any sort of EDR or sensor or anything like that. So it becomes a bit of a blind spot. So you could deploy malware on there and sort of conduct your operation from there without anyone being the wiser. Other than that, China has been very aggressive in their pursuit of vulnerabilities. They don't just research. Like, they steal vulnerabilities. They steal information from vulnerability researchers. They steal information from companies that have information like F5 has about Big IP. And there are also rumors circulating that China has also stolen, basically Chinese offensive organizations have stolen or abused Chinese defensive organizations' access to early information about vulnerabilities in order to weaponize them and use them against their own targets. Which is one of the reasons that a few Chinese companies have been blocked from these early access feeds.
Okay, well, if we learn more, we'll tell you more. Next topic. Emerging use of malware invoking AI, termed living off the LLM, which is a great theme. Let's start there. We get a lot of questions about how AI is changing the game in cyber attacks, reasonably so. Very trendy topic. And while some people may argue that AI attacks are overhyped, there's really a clear trend over the past year where we see actors that are leveraging AI tooling found on workstations. Some examples: LameHug, Amazon Q developer extension compromise, Singularity, ... Amitai, what is living off the LLM?
I also really like that name. I think we took it from an article from Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I don't know if they coined this, but I think that's where I sort of saw this recently. And yeah, the idea is that you have like living off the land, which is a term that's been around for a while, where instead of threat actors sort of bringing their own tooling into the environment, which has a higher likelihood of being detected, they basically live off the land in the sense that they use things that are already there. So on all of our computers and in servers in our company networks, there is already tooling that they can use or abuse for their own means, for their own ends. So the idea is that they have to be smart about how they do this, but it's things that are like already running, things that are already generating a lot of noise that they can hide in. And now, with the advent of people installing CLIs for the various AI services like Claude and OpenAI and Gemini, so with those things being installed by people on their laptops, attackers are now starting to take advantage of that. And it's really interesting because like in the examples you mentioned, basically attackers are building in functionality into the malware that they're deploying on victim machines to take advantage of those CLIs if they are present on the machine.
In this case, the prompt becomes the indicator of compromise, right? So what kind of monitoring needs to be put in place to capture, be aware of that this is happening, to detect it?
So what you're going to see in these cases is you're going to see basically, let's say, a script that the malware is using when the attacker puts it on the machine. Once they gain access, and that script is going to be invoking the LLM through the AI CLI, and it's going to be prompting things like, help me find all of the sensitive data on this laptop. Those prompts in and of themselves can be IOCs. I want to reference a project called Nova, developed by Thomas, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, Thomas Rossia for Microsoft. And he built this project that's sort of a way to sort of make these sort of IOCs actionable by sort of scanning the logs of AI CLIs, for example, and you can look for prompts that are known to be associated with specific malware, because the prompt itself might be like a specific string. It might always be the exact same sentence. Um, Oftentimes, before doing that sort of thing, like help me find all of the sensitive files in this machine, they first need to jailbreak the LLM. And those jailbreak prompts are also sort of recognizable because they often repeat themselves and they're often phrased the exact same way. So you can use, like, similar to scanning for hashes or scanning for certain strings that might indicate something being malware, you can also scan for specific prompts.
Wait, can I ask you a naive question? Like, can I tell if something happened to my personal workstation, or just as an organization can I do monitoring?
So that's a good question. I think if you are using an AI CLI, I think you have logs in some cases. However, in many cases, those logs will cost a bit more money or a lot more money, depending on how much you use them. So for this to be done at scale, an organization does need to have um, that logging enabled in their cloud account, for example. However, you can do these scans locally. Like, you can scan your machine for the malware, for the prompt, like in the malware binary, for example. So, like, there are two different places you can do this scan.
For the attackers that are pursuing this, like, why are they using this mechanism? What does it give them?
I think our leading theory right now is that they're doing this for stealth, for operational security. Just because this means that when you scan the malware itself, it doesn't appear necessarily malicious. Because again, it just contains a prompt, which is just words, right? It contains a sentence. And that isn't something that EDRs or malware scanners are looking for yet at scale. But again, if we start doing things like what Nova sort of allows you to do at scale, then that might make this technique a bit more difficult to implement.
Interesting. If you want to learn more about this, there's a wonderful blog post by Scott Piper on malware invoking AI, and highly recommend. We will link it. Check it out. Okay, to close off, we have a new section, quick hits. It is to cover things you cannot do anything about, but we've decided you should know about. Number one, the Crimson Collective Threat Actor. This is great. This is by, well, great depending on who you are.
Just like the F5 incident is fun. It's great in the same sense that it was fun.
It is a group that appears to be related to Lapsus and Scattered Spider, i.e., the calm teenagers. And they seem to target companies only with red logos, like Red Hat and Nintendo. Now, it's unclear if they only target red logoed companies, or when they successfully hit a red logoed company, they claim it by the Crimson Group. Do you think red is their favorite color? How do you think they got to this?
I'm sure this is some some inside joke. I mean, it has to be. I mean, I don't I don't see what else it could be.
Maybe this is opposed to the MO of this section, but what could you do about this?
Yeah, so I think the only thing you could do is potentially change your logo. I mean, if they're going after red logo companies, then if you got a red logo, you know what you need to do.
Get creative.
So our second quick hit was a crazy bug in Entra ID discovered by Dirk-Jan Mollema, who's a great Azure researcher. And this vulnerability was a cross-tenant vulnerability that could have allowed any attacker with relatively minimal effort to gain admin privileges on any Azure customer. And Microsoft has fixed it, so you don't need to do anything about it. I think he did write up a few ideas on how you could potentially verify for yourself whether you were exploited by this. So do check out his blog post, which we will link to.
And then tell us in the comments if you liked quick hits. We could keep it running or we could kill it. So let us know. And on that note, if you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe and share a link to the podcast, but not your cloud keys. And as always, if your cloud security strategy is making you cry, don't worry, just cry out cloud.
Security.